recording and welcome along to our Elements of Costing revision evening session, everybody. Tonight we are looking at task 3 for Elements of Costing. You should be able to hear me okay, you should be able to see me okay. So we're looking at Elements of Costing. We've had 2 sessions already this year, so now we are on the 3rd session. And tonight's session is about task 3 from our exam, and we're going to be looking at identifying and calculating different methods of issues and inventory valuation, or what you might have heard of referred to as stock valuation. So we're looking at valuing what inventory we've got left in the business, and we are looking at valuing the inventory that has left the business. And you should have all received this task already by email, and you should have the intro information available. But as it says here, task 3 is all about identifying methods of issue and inventory valuation. It is worth 14 marks in our exam, which means we have 13 minutes to complete it. Obviously, as we're going through this task, please do get involved in the chat box. Ask if you have any questions. More than happy to help out with any questions you guys have here. So, looking at this task then, the information here starts off and says inventory is an important figure for our financial statements. It absolutely is. And this is because it's in 2 places in our financial statements. It is in our profit or loss account, so it makes up the figures for our profit for the year, and it is also included in our statement of financial position, aka the balance sheet. Inventory is things that we have bought to sell, to make, whatever. And inventory is that stuff that is left over in our business at the end of the period. And if that inventory is left in our business at the end of the period, we are going to include that inventory as a current asset in our statement of financial position. So we want one figure to go in there. At the same time, we also need to know our inventory figure so we can look at our cost of sales. And just as a reminder, our cost of sales is made up of 3 things. We take our opening inventory figure, i.e. the leftover inventory from last year. We add on our purchases figure, and we take off our closing inventory. So you can see working out that closing inventory figure is our current asset in our statement of financial position, and it is also the closing inventory figure that we remove from cost of sales in our statement of profit or loss. So a really, really important figure, because this is increasing our asset balance in our balance sheet, our statement of financial position, and your closing inventory figure also reduces cost of sales, therefore increasing profit in the statement of profit or loss. So it's really important that we get the valuation correct for this. Now, the issue with inventory is that sometimes it is difficult to say exactly which items are still left in stock. And I think of, for example, things like flour. Let's say I'm a cake manufacturer. I think of flour and I think to myself, okay, we might have taken receipt of maybe 3 or 4 different deliveries of flour during the year. And those 3 or 4 deliveries might amount to 10,000 kilograms. When I come to look at my store at the end of the year, I might only have 2,000 kilograms left in inventory. So when I look at that 2,000 kilograms that's left, I'm thinking to myself, well, hold on, is that the 2,000 kilos that I bought at the start of the month? Is that the 2,000 kilos I bought at the middle of the month? Is it the 2,000 kilos I bought at the end of the month? We can't say for absolute definite. So a big part of inventory valuation is us estimating the value of inventory. And there's 3 ways that we are allowed to use, or we can use, to help us value our inventory. The first one is called FIFO. The second one is called LIFO. And the third one is called ACCA. Now, under FIFO, it stands for first in, first out. And that means that when you're looking at your inventory, you assume that the first item you bought into the business, say the first kilogram of flour you bought in, is the first kilogram of flour you would use when going through and actually making your cakes. So first in, first out, the first items we bought into the inventory, into stock, into our warehouse, are the first items we then issue and sell or use. Okay, so an example there is food. Often if you are making cake, for example, if you are going to be using flour, you would want to use the first lot of flour you bought in making your cakes first, because it has expiry dates. Okay, so FIFO, a common example I think of is food, food products that go out of date. Now, the next inventory valuation I want to talk about is LIFO, and LIFO stands for last in, first out. Okay, so last in, first out. And just like with FIFO, where when we make an issue from our warehouse, we say, we are going to assume it is the first stuff that we've bought in that's going. Last in, first out, or LIFO, we assume that the stuff that we are issuing from our warehouse is the last item we bought in. So in this idea of this cake factory, we would be saying, okay, if there are 3 deliveries of flour in a month, under last in, first out, we would say that, that we have used the most recent delivery first. So last in, first out, you use your newest inventory first. And an example that I think of for this is, say, a construction company, where they might use loads and loads of different screws, nails, bolts, whatever, to build whatever they're building. And in that situation, I might be thinking to myself, okay, well, we might have this big vat of bolts that we are using, and every time we get a new delivery of bolts, it gets dumped on the top of this vat. So every time we use one, every time we issue a bolt from the warehouse, you'll go to the top of the vat, pick one up and use that. And in that situation, that means that you are going to be picking up and using the last item that you bought in. And that's LIFO. Just as an aside, you are not allowed to use LIFO from an accounts preparation situation, i.e. under accounting standards, you're not allowed to use LIFO to value your inventory. Now, the last inventory valuation method is ACCA, which stands for average cost. And that says, look, hold on, instead of saying we bought the first stuff we bought in, instead of saying we've used the first stuff we bought in, instead of saying we've used the last stuff we bought in, average cost says, let's take an average of everything we've bought in, and that's what we'll be using. So say, for example, here, I like the idea of maybe a drinks manufacturer. So it could be that there's a squash manufacturer, for example, and every time they make a batch of squash, it gets put into a vat with all the other batches. So when I'm thinking to myself, what's gone into this, if they pull out a bottle of squash to sell, what have they actually sold? Well, actually, all of this squash in this vat had all mixed together. And so I could have had some from the first batch I did, from the second, from the third, from the 10th, whatever. And actually, this bottle of squash is now an average of all the previous batches that we had made. So average cost takes an average of the different purchases we have made to help us value inventory. Obviously, guys, if you have any questions, please do just type them in the chat box. More than happy to answer anything you have. But those are our 3 different inventory valuation methods: FIFO, LIFO, and ACCA. Now, how is this going to be examined? This is going to be examined in our elements of costing paper by generally asking us to tick boxes and fill in numbers for multiple different things. As it says here, we must be able to calculate the following: the cost of an issue under FIFO, so the cost of goods leaving our warehouse, so the cost of an issue under FIFO, cost of an issue under LIFO, and the cost of an issue under AVCO. And again, we also need to value the closing inventory under FIFO, under LIFO, and under AVCO. And so the two tasks we're going to go through today, task 3 revision example 1, task 3 revision example 3. Here, this is a fairly typical exam question. So let's have a little look at what we're being asked to do. It says here, you are told the opening inventory of a single raw material in the stores is 200 units. They bought it for £10 a unit. During the month, there was another purchase, and then there was an issue. Okay, that's all fine. But what we've got to do with that information is answer 6 questions. It says, identify the valuation method described in the statements below. So we've been told the closing inventory value, we've been told the issue value, we've been told an issue value, and we've got to put a tick in the box of whether that shows FIFO, LIFO, or AVCO. We've also got a question, and this information here is the same as before. So this is the exact same as the earlier task, but now we have 3 true or false statements. Is this the cost of issue for FIFO? Is this the LIFO closing inventory? Is this the AVCO closing inventory? And you can properly tie yourselves up in knots here, because you could look at each question and try and answer that individually. But if I take a step back, I can see that actually they're asking me for all 6 of these elements. And so the best way to approach these questions is to go through FIFO, LIFO, and AVCO, and for each one, work out what the cost of issue is and the value of closing inventory. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through and work out the different valuations. So let's have a little look here. Let's look at the information. You're told the opening inventory of a single raw material in the stores is 200 units and they paid £10 per unit. So I know here we have the situation where we had 200 units to start. The cost per unit is £10 per unit. And so here we end up with a value of £2,000 that we started our store with. So 200 units at £10, £2,000. The question then says, during the month, 600 units are received at £15 per unit. So I'm going to do 600 units at £15 per unit. 600 times 15 is £9,000. So at this stage, we have 800 units in inventory that have cost us £11,000. The question then says the next week 500 units are issued. So we know that 500 units are taken out of inventory, which means we have 300 units left. And the question becomes, okay, but what was the cost of those? The question then becomes, what is our closing inventory? So that's the basic information, okay? The basic information that we have laid out is the purchases into stock and the issues that have taken place. Let me just squidge this up a bit so I've got a little bit more space to write. Okay. So to answer the questions, I'm now just going to go through and work out for the different valuation methods what is going to take place. So the issue of 500 units under FIFO means first in, first out. So when they issued 500 units, we're going to assume that 200 come from this first issue here. So they used 200 from the first purchase, which cost £10. So we have £2,000 overall. Then they must have taken 300 from the second purchase here. So 300 from the second inclusion in inventory, and each one of those cost £15. So 300 times 15 is 4,500. So when they issued 500 units under FIFO, we would have said that the issue was for 2,000 plus 4,500. We would say that is £6,500. Well, what does that mean there is left in inventory? Well, overall, the company has spent £11,000 on inventory. They have just said that we are issuing £6,500 of inventory, which must mean that at the year end, at the end of this, 11,000 minus 6,500, we have £4,500 of inventory left. So overall here, we have issued £6,500, we have retained £4,500 in inventory. And that is FIFO. Obviously, let me know if you have any questions, guys. Let's do the same thing then, but for LIFO. And again, we're still trying to issue 500 units overall, except under LIFO, we say instead of going to the first receipt into inventory, we start at the last receipt into inventory, i.e. the 600 units. Well, if we're issuing 500 units and the last issue brought in 600 units, I know I can use the entirety of the issue coming from that line. So here, 500 units will come from that receipt into store at £15 per unit. So we are going to have 500 units at the £15. They have issued £7,500 overall worth of inventory. Okay, that's fine. So that's what they've issued. But the inventory valuation, well, they had £11,000 overall. We're now saying under LIFO that they have issued 7,500, which means 11,000 minus 7,500. There are £3,500 of inventory under LIFO. That's what we're going to do with LIFO. Just gone to the last receipt into our stores. So that means we now have to think about AVCO or average cost. And under average cost, we are going to work out on average how much did the two different receipts into inventory cost us. Well, what we can see here under AVCO is that we paid £11,000 to receive 800 units of stock, of inventory. So we know that we paid 11,000 for 800 units of inventory. So 11,000 divided by 800, I know that each unit of inventory is going to cost me £13.75. 11,000 divided by 800. So under AVCO, we're still trying to work out how much the cost of the issue is of that 500. Well, what we can say here is 500, move it up a bit, 500 at 1375, we end up with an issue of 6875. So 6875 is the value of what we have issued. We know that there was £11,000 in inventory, as we've already said. We've just issued 6875 of that. And so 11,000 minus 6875, we end up with 4125. And so having done that, we've now got all of the figures that we need. We needed the cost of issue under FIFO, LIFO and AVCO. Well, we've done the cost of issue under FIFO, we've done the cost of issue under LIFO, we've done the cost of issue under AVCO. We needed the closing inventory valuation for those three as well. And again, we have now worked out those three figures on the right there. I now have to flick back to the other screen so I can actually answer the question. At this stage, you know, I wouldn't worry that you haven't actually put anything in the answer screen yet, because you've still had to be doing a load of calculations to get there. But now we're on to the easy bit. We've done all the difficult calculations. Now we just have to go and fill this in. So those are my answers. So the first question we had then, identify the valuation method described in the statement below. The closing inventory is valued at 4,500. Well, we can see that was FIFO. So I can just go and tick FIFO for that question. Next one says the issue of 500 units is costed at £7,500. Well, flicking over to my workings, I can see the cost of issue of 7,500 is LIFO. So I can just go and tick LIFO for that answer. And the last one, the issue of 500 units is costed at 6,875. Again, 6,875, there's my cost of issue. I can see that's AVCO, so I'm going to go and tick the AVCO box. So that's my answers there. It actually nicely went in FIFO, LIFO, AVCO for me. My next question then was true or false statements. The first thing says FIFO cost the issue of 500 units at 6,500. Let's have a little look. Yes, it does. The cost of issue of FIFO was 6,500, so that is true. It says LIFO values the closing inventory at 3,500. Well, let's go and look at our workings. I've got LIFO here. I've got my closing inventory. Yes, it does value it at 3,500. I'm going to give that one a tick for true as well. And lastly, AVCO values the closing inventory at 4,125. Let's have a little look here. AVCO valued the closing inventory at 4,125. That is also true. So 3 trues there. And that is the end of that task. So you can see you spend all your time doing the calculations, and then that bit takes about 30 seconds. Really, really easy. So do make sure you do all your calculations on your scrap paper first, then come on and actually answer the question at hand. Do let me know in the chat box if you have any questions on that at all, guys. But that is that question. I'm going to move on to the next task that we have available. So here, task 3, revision example 3. Again, it's so similar. Okay, we have the 3 different valuation methods described in the statements below. And again, they've given us 3 statements, 5, and we've got to tick does that. And again, further down, we've got 3 true or false statements. Again, this information is the same. So you can see how similar the questions are. Yeah, we know that something is coming up on this in our exam. We know it's likely to look very, very similar to this. So let's draw up the information that we need here. I'm going to take another bit of paper. I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to set up my column for units. I'm going to put in my cost per unit, and I'm going to put in my total cost over here. So let's have a little look at the information that's been provided. You have been told the opening inventory of a single raw material is 1,000 units at £40 per unit. So what do they currently have in the warehouse? They have 1,000 units at £40 per unit. They have £40,000 of inventory in the warehouse currently. So 1,000 at 40, 40,000 there. So that's dealt with that first piece. Then it comes on, it says during the month, 9,000 units are received. So now we take another receipt into the store and it says it's at £50 per unit. So 9,000 units at £50 per unit. So now we've got 9,000 at £50 per unit. We have just taken receipt of £450,000. So what does that mean that we have at this stage? That means at this stage, we now have 10,000 units at £90. So 10,000 units at £90 there. What am I talking about? 10,000 units at £90. I'm so sorry. 10,000 units costing us £490,000. The question then goes on. The following week, 9,500 units are issued. Okay, so now we know what our question's asking us. We know that they issued 9,500. What we don't know is what's the cost per unit. Therefore, what's the total cost? And therefore, what is the closing inventory? And that's essentially what we want to work out. Here we have the cost of issue that we need to calculate. And here we have the closing inventory, which we need to calculate. Cool. So let's look at the information in the question. We're now dealt with everything from the initial info, so we're now going to go through and do our FIFO, LIFO and AVCO calculations. So again, I want to work out what is the cost of issue, what is the value of closing inventory from the information we have. So we'll start with FIFO. When we issue 9,500 units, we know under FIFO that we're first of all going to go to that first line that we bought in. So with that 9,500, we know that we're going to take 1,000 from the first line, which is valued at £40. So we know £40,000 comes from the initial receipt. And then we know the remaining 8,500 of that must have come from line 2, where we're charged £50. So here, 8,500 times 50, we end up with £425,000. So we know that we're looking at £465,000 overall for our issue cost. So that's our final figure there. In terms of the inventory, however, we know that we had bought in £490,000 overall, as we'd already written up, but now we have just issued £465,000 of that, which means we have £25,000 left as our closing inventory valuation. So I've now got my two figures for FIFO, 465 for the issue and 25,000 for the inventory. Let's do the same thing for LIFO then. So with LIFO, overall, again, we're now looking at 9,500 as we were before. We're going to go to the last receipt in. So we're going to start with the 9,000. Okay, so we know that of that 9,500, 9,000 come from the last thing we bought in, but 9,000 units at £50. So we know that 450,000 is that initial cost of issue. There's still 500 units left to issue, and that's when we go to the next line up, and we're going to use 500 from that 1,000 line, where the cost per unit was £40. 500 times 40 there is 20,000. So overall, we're looking at £470,000 of inventory. And that's what we've issued. So under LIFO, we know that we have issued £470,000 of inventory. So what is the inventory that is left? Well, exactly the same as before. We had bought in 490,000 overall. That was our total figure. We have now issued £470,000, which means we have £20,000 left in inventory. So I now know my issue and inventory valuations for LIFO. So let's look at AVCO then. Under AVCO, we want to work out the average cost of everything we've bought in. Well, we have bought in overall £490,000 worth of inventory for 10,000 units. So here I'm going to do 490,000 divided by 10,000, and we can establish that the average price was £49. So when we issued 9,500 units, I'm going to value those at £49. And we're going to end up with £465,500 for our issue. Exactly the same as before. The total amount we've bought in is 490,000. We have now issued 465,500, and as such, 490 minus the 465,500, we end up with 24,500 of closing inventory. And just like before, that question there has taken us 6 minutes to do all the numbers. That's where you're going to spend all your time. We've now got 6 figures and we can now go and answer the question. Okay, so now we've got our cost of issue of FIFO, LIFO and AVCO, and we've got our closing inventory valuation for those 3 as well. So let's look at the first question. It says the issue of 9,500 units is costed at 465,500. So let's go and see which valuation gave an issue cost of 465,500. Well, I can see here the one that's given me 465,500 is AVCO. So here we're going to go and tick the AVCO box. The next question we can see the closing inventory is 25,000. Again, let's go and look at which closing inventory was 25,000. I can see here that is FIFO. So FIFO gave us a closing inventory of 25,000. We'll give that one a tick. And the last one I can see the issue is 470. So which one gives us an issue cost of 470,000? Again, here I can see that figure is for LIFO. So I'm going to go through and tick LIFO. And that's the answer to those 3. Next, true or false statements. AVCO costs the issue of 9,500 units at £465,000. Let's have a little look. AVCO costs the issue of 9,500 units at 465. No, it doesn't. Be careful, because the cost of issue is 465,500, whereas it says in the question, does it cost the issue at 465? It must be false. Watch out for that, because that is easy to accidentally miss. So that is false. It was actually 465. FIFO values the closing inventory at 24,500. Let's have a look at what we got for FIFO closing inventory. No, we can see it's £25,000. Again, that is false. And the last question we've got here, LIFO values the closing inventory at £20,000. Is that true or false? Well, if I have a look at LIFO, the closing inventory was £20,000. And so that question there is true. And that is exactly how we would answer that question. There is one other example that's included in your sheets, but I'm going to send you round my answer to give you guys a chance to have a go at that one yourself. So I'll write up my answer and send it round when I send round my workings from today. It's the same thing. Do exactly what we've done before and just do that piece again on a different style task. But at that stage, I'm going to stop the recording for our elements of costing revision session. I hope this has been useful to help us revise the methods of valuing inventory. We will be back on Tuesday again at 6 o'clock to look at task 4. I'm going to send round the recordings tomorrow, guys, together with my workings, and I will also send round the task ready for you guys to have a go at before next Tuesday. But thank you very much for coming along, everybody. I will now stop the recording.